Hello everyone, and welcome to vlog 45 in our Essential Jesus series. Today we're looking at Matthew chapter 24, a passage that's sometimes called the Olivet Discourse, because Jesus was teaching his disciples on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. The passage begins with the disciples looking around them and marvelling at the wonderful Herod's temple nearby. And Jesus' reply to them was, "Do you see all these things? Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." They must have had a shock when he said that, but of course it happened 40 years later in AD 70, when the Romans attacked Jerusalem and destroyed the whole city and the temple, with over 1 million Jews being slaughtered and many more taken off to slavery. In verses 4 to 14, Jesus predicts that his disciples and the church would have to face some very difficult times ahead. He spoke about persecution, about them being arrested and even put to death. And then in verses 15 onwards, he speaks about the end times, a time of great stress when there'd be wars, famines, earthquakes, and also false prophets would arise who would lead the people astray. But that these tribulations would end on his return, his second coming. Again, the disciples must have been pretty alarmed, and they wanted to know when it would happen. The big question we have to ask is, have these prophecies already happened, or are they still to come? And there are two main views on this, Preterism and Futurism. So firstly, Preterism, from a Latin word that means past. It teaches that all prophecy about the temple has already taken place in AD 70. Jesus quoted Daniel when he said, "So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." And preterists say that the abomination that causes desolation was actually the disrespect which the Romans showed towards Jerusalem. But of course this doesn't explain where Jesus' second coming fits in. The second thought is futurism, and this teaches that many of the prophecies of Daniel, of Revelation and the Olivet Discourse are still to happen. That in the end times there'll be a time of terrible tribulation, at the end of which Jesus would return. In verse 21, Jesus says, "For there will be great distress, unequalled from the beginning of the world until now, never to be equalled again." The four disciples asked Jesus in verse 3, "And what will be the signs of your coming and at the end of the age?" And in verse 6, Jesus says, "You'll hear of wars and rumours of wars, but do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are just the beginning of birth pains." And he went on in verse 23 to warn them not to be led by false prophets. He says, "At that time, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here's the Messiah,' or 'There he is,' don't believe it." And of course, there are many occasions in history where people have claimed they know when Jesus will return. In the 19th century, a Baptist minister called William Miller said it would happen in 1844, and many believed him, and they sold all their worldly goods. But it didn't happen. They'd been misled and led astray. Jesus was clear. No one would know the time, not even he. Only God would know. Verse 29 makes it clear that after the time of terrible distress, the end will come suddenly. Verse 29, "Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon won't give out its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and there will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with great power and glory. And they will see his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. A big question we have to ask is, will the church and Christians be protected from these difficult times, or must we endure them with the rest of mankind? This is where theologians have got different views. Some talk about a rapture, a time before the tribulation, when Jesus will come and take Christians away to safety. They quote two verses to explain this. Revelation 3 verse 10. Since you have kept my commands to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that's going to come on the whole world, to test the inhabitants of the earth. And then 1 Thessalonians 4, the Lord himself will descend from heaven. The dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we'll always be with the Lord. There's actually no reference to the word rapture in the Bible. Jesus describes the tribulation, but he doesn't mention the rapture. But verse 22 is interesting. He says, if those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. What Jesus does make clear is that we won't know the time of his second coming, but we must be ready. In verse 40 he says, 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other will be left. So you must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. We don't know when this will happen, but we do have indications where. It's probably Jerusalem, probably the Mount of Olives. Acts 1 verse 11 describes the ascension of Jesus from the Mount of Olives. It says, they were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into heaven? This same Jesus who's been taken from you will come back in the same way you've seen him go into heaven. Can I finish by reading a passage from the next to last chapter in the whole Bible? It's from Revelation 21. And this helps to make things clear. It's called A New Heaven and a New Earth. Verse 21 says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. This is a great thought. There'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. So there we are, lots to think about today. The Olivet Discourse. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great day. Bye now.